Hey, welcome back to the Unbelievable Podcast. I am BJ Reidell, back here with my guy Drew Mahowald, and today we are jumping into our off-season structure here, starting off with some results from the combine, and we'll also give you some updates with the Vikings as well throughout this process. But over the next couple of weeks, we'll be speaking mostly about the draft, the prospects involved, how the Vikings are stacked up in regard to that situation. And then keep up with any news and notes that come across our desk here. So today we're going to be doing Everson Griffen specifically. He's been a big part of this franchise for a long time. I feel like he deserves his own segment, and his opt-out, as I'm sure you guys are all aware of, that happened. That's done. That's set in stone. I think most of us were sort of expecting that to happen, but we'll discuss the ramifications of that and the changes that we might see on the Vikings defense. And then we'll do a little bit on the measurements that happened today. There was only 3 positions today: quarterback, tight end, and wide receiver. So not too much fun for Vikings fans. But we will go over a couple of these names because I think a couple of them are somewhat interesting because they do have some ties to the team. And then we'll finish up with a new segment, and I'll introduce that segment at the end of the show. So you have to listen to the whole show to hear the new segment. So that's what I'm doing right now. But before we do all that, I want to start this off with a Thursday question. And even though the show is going up on Wednesday, I'm going to continue to call this a Thursday question because eventually the show will go back to a Tuesday-Thursday schedule. So this one's a really open-ended. I thought this would be a fun one to start with. So one part of your day that you would like to skip every single day. So I mean, like, this isn't something where, you can pick and choose, like, oh, I don't like doing that 3 days a week, or like this part of my day annoys me sometimes. You have to pick something to skip every single day for the rest of your life. What is one part of your day that you'd skip?
One part of my day that I would skip every day. The part where I think, okay, here we go. When you get out of the shower and it's like freezing cold.
God, really? I thought I was so unique with that.
That's what you picked.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. All right, keep talking. I got to think of a new one now.
Well, if that's the same one, then that's fine.
No, keep going. I'm going to think of another one.
That's the one thing I thought of that's like bad every single day.
Yeah,
I was just going to say showering in general. That's just time I don't want to spend.
Right.
But in some cases, showers are like, like if I go golfing for 5 hours on a hot day, I want a nice shower to, feels good. So I'm just trying to think of other scenarios that like aren't, I don't know. Yeah, so, that's the only one I can think of that every single day it's like unpleasant to me.
Okay. Yeah, and I certainly agree that would have been mine, but I'm going to pick one that I think will resonate with most people that listen to the show and most people on the entire planet. I hate doing the dishes, and I regularly do the dishes because I live alone. So I do military style, meaning I have more plates than just one, but I have one. I use one plate, one fork, one knife, one spoon, one bowl whenever I eat, and I wash all of them immediately. And it's, it takes 8 minutes or whatever, but it's always tedious. You always get gross stuff on your hands because food is gross when it's not in your body. So that's definitely something that I would like to get rid of always. And especially if, like, when I get to a later point in my life and, I have more plates involved in my daily cycle, that's just going to get more tedious. So washing the dishes is definitely something I would like to get rid of.
I think laundry would be another one too.
Laundry's right up there, but I just don't do laundry as much. Like, that's normally a bi-weekly thing for me.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I guess
I don't hate it as much just because normally I just put it in.
Well, it's one of those two where like it's an everyday thing, and laundry's not an everyday thing. For me, washing dishes is an everyday thing, even though it probably should be in our apartment right now. But
that's fair.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of things that you do every single day, that like, I don't know, 30 seconds out of the shower. I
definitely agree. Especially in the freezing cold, like, what was it, like like a week ago when it was like negative 12 out with a minus 25 wind chill or whatever. Walking out there, I mean, it instantly freezes my hair because I'm not going to sit there and blow. I don't own a blow dryer.
That some people in Minnesota can relate to, if they have a parked car outside, would be the window scraping.
Oh, yes,
that'd be a good one.
That's right up there too.
That's winter specific task, but that would be number one if it was winter all the time and I was parking a car outside.
Right. Yeah, I actually had to do that this morning, and it's the worst when you don't do it and you just try to get to work. Like,
Or when you are running late and you don't kind of prepare yourself for the extra 5 minutes that you have to take outside, scraping the window. But yeah,
I kind of do like
good ones on the fly there. I think.
You've seen Ace Ventura, right? Where Jim
actually.
Carrey, I'm kind of surprised. Where Jim Carrey hangs his head out the window and he's driving like this because the dude in the very beginning of the movie or whatever breaks his windshield. That's basically me. Like, I get very close to that sometimes. Anyways,
I would recommend just clearing the windshield. It might be safer and
I could
more
do that, but I have like an 8-minute commute, so it's like we could probably make it work. And then it generally like the sun takes care of it over the course of the day when I'm parked outside.
Or your defroster after it's on for 5 minutes and with cold air, and then finally
pretty good.
Warm air.
Yeah, it's not bad. All right, it's a solid Thursday question. I'm happy with that. Let's talk about Everson Griffen now. So, to reiterate what I said at the top, Everson Griffen has officially opted out of his most recent contract. That contract was negotiated a few years back and then restructured last year, basically with an opt-out clause that allowed Everson to get out of his current deal, which would have subjected him to zero guaranteed money over the next couple years and a $13 million cap hit coming into this next season. And because he played enough snaps and I believe enough games, I think there was 2 qualifiers there. I think it was like 10 games and I don't remember the snap count. I apologize.
But the snap count was 79% for. I think that's what he actually played. I don't know what it might have been. I'm guessing 75 based on
something like that.
A good number to be at. But yeah.
Okay. So he elected to opt out. This was not something that it kind of came by surprise. Like this, I don't think this blindsided. This definitely didn't blindside me. It didn't blindside you. You, the listener, I'm guessing you probably were not blindsided by this decision either because it was a common topic on Vikings discussions on Twitter and Reddit, all that kind of stuff. So but it officially happened, and that's something that I want to talk about now because Everson Griffen has basically been a fixture in Minnesota. For sure,
a decade, pretty much.
I mean, for sure since Mike Zimmer arrived, because if you remember, Zimmer handed him that massive contract, which he was at the time kind of undeserving of. And before that, he was a rotational player playing behind Robinson and Jared Allen. And he stepped into that role. I believe it was a $46.5 million contract, and it was one of the first articles I ever wrote. I was writing for a website called Rant Sports. I don't even know if it still exists. And I wrote an article saying that the Vikings made a huge mistake. It was a huge error in judgment, and that the Vikings had, essentially sealed their fate in terms of hurting their salary cap by signing Everson Griffen to a long-term deal without proven results. And my goodness, has he proven me wrong. And I'm very thankful for that. He's become one of the favorite players in the entire franchise. Probably in the franchise's history, but certainly in the last 20 years. I mean, he's one of the most likable people, period. It's very fun. He's always great when he's mic'd up. An extremely lovable character, and everything about him is just he's just a great asset to have on your team. I mean, he's a phenomenal pass rusher. And granted, his run defense has kind of declined a little bit, but he's always been very good at that as well. And then just excuse me, in terms of being a locker room leader, he definitely defined this team from like 2014 to 2017 when you have guys like Anthony Barr, Eric Kendricks coming in, Danielle Hunter. I mean, you can credit the evolution of Danielle Hunter to some degree, probably to Everson Griffen and his ability to kind of be a player coach. And the other guys that have rotated in there, I mean, I can't imagine Ofedio Odenigbo doesn't have great things to say about Everson and the help that he's provided. Basically, the point that I'm ramping up to is he's been a staple in this organization forever. And now there's a potential that he's going to leave.
Yeah.
So the first question that I have for you is very simple. Do you think Everson Griffen remains with the Vikings?
I do. I think in most cases, in 90% of the cases, players out there will, they'll go to the spot where they can make the most money. Right. But we have seen the Vikings, have proven to be one of those rare teams, rare franchises the last few years now where players will take less money to play in Minnesota, which is unique considering, state income tax in Minnesota. And
listen to you, college graduate now, starting to think about state income tax.
But that you got the weather up here. It's not like, if you talk about a famous,
right.
professional athlete like Minneapolis, Minnesota isn't necessarily your top desired place in most cases, but it seems like it's work. I mean, Anthony Barr took less money to come to play with Minnesota. Kirk Cousins took less money to play for Minnesota. Not granted, those are both bidding wars with the Jets. Maybe it's just a Jets thing, but which is very much could be the case.
Point, yeah.
Considering how that franchise is run. But point being, I feel like Everson too, given that he has played a decade now in Minnesota, there's seems to be a pretty solid relationship between player and franchise, player and ownership, player and coaching staff there. That he would be more apt to playing in Minnesota for maybe less money in 2020, but maybe some extended guarantees or something, a longer term deal than he had, maybe more security for a couple more years to sort of end his NFL career. Whatever the case may be, whatever he's looking for, I feel like he'd be more willing to give into that in Minnesota after a decade as a Viking.
Absolutely. And I echo all the sentiments you just said, and I'll add a couple more notes. I'm with you that I believe that Everson stays in Minnesota. I will say that there's a couple things here that, and these are somewhat subjective. This is somewhat subjective analysis, but based off of his playing career and what we've seen from Everson Griffen from the time he was at USC and he was a fourth-round pick to where he is now in 2020 as one of the franchise's all-time leaders in sacks and basically every statistic that a defensive lineman can rack up, Everson Griffen is near the top of. Now, there's been two things that have happened throughout his entire career that have been not so great, and yet Minnesota continued to stick with him, and I think that's very important. The first one being what happened at USC, having some character issues. I won't get too into that, but because I don't think it's worth the time, and really this is his. I want to highlight the greatness of him, but if you want to look, just type in Everson Griffen USC character issues, and you'll find some character issues about Everson Griffen. And that's part of the reason why he slipped to the fourth round, and the Vikings were able to get him at such a value in that draft. The second thing being the mental health scare last year. And that was obviously extremely challenging for the organization. We saw what happened the very next week in the Bills game. It's very challenging for the fans and the people that adore his character and his person. But he was able to come back, and he seems to be back to his normal, regular self. I don't believe that his family suffered all that much with regard to where he is now in terms of where it could have gone and how bad that situation really could have been. And the Vikings stuck with him through it. Everyone backed him up. I mean, do you remember that week? Mm-hmm. How kind of crazy that week was heading up to the Bills game? And all the players were asked about Everson, and everyone was giving him his full support. Mental health is a scary thing. It's something that no one likes to talk about, and honestly, we're all very uncomfortable talking about it, and I'm not comfortable talking about someone else's mental health. But it's something that he had to deal with. It's something that, I'm just being straight up, it could have ended his career if things have gone south. It could have changed a lot.
It could have ended more than that.
It definitely could have. So that was a situation that was very scary, and the Vikings, not just his teammates that he's on, going to battle with on the field, but the coaching staff, the ownership, everyone stuck up for him, stuck their neck out for him once again, and he returned to the player that I think that all of us kind of believe he still can be at this. I believe he's 34 years old now. So I think that those two things carry a lot of weight for a guy like Everson Griffen. Granted, I do not know Everson Griffen personally. He's actually one of the few Vikings players on this roster that I actually never got a chance to speak with at any point in my sports journalism career. So I don't know him very well. But I do think that he's the type of guy who takes those things seriously, takes the opportunity to be with the Vikings despite the character issues at USC. I think he took that very seriously. And he obviously was able to outgrow the kind of youthful exuberance, if you will. And sticking by him when he was in probably the deepest, darkest hole of his entire life, I think that carries weight. And just to kind of wrap this all up in a nutshell, he has already straight up said, I want to be a Minnesota Viking for the rest of my life, while acknowledging the fact that this is a business and that's very rare. And Chad Greenway being one of the few situations where it actually worked out for a player who was rapidly declining. But I think that this is a situation where ultimately the Vikings want him because of the what he can bring as a rotational player leading into the kind of the twilight of his career, and also the presence that he brings in the locker room for what has really become a pretty young team defensively, with exception to Harrison Smith. Because, I mean, if you think about what's going to happen to this defense, there's going to be an overhaul this offseason. It's going to happen. I mean, Trey Waynes could be gone.
Especially at cornerback for sure.
Yeah, Trey Waynes and Xavier Rhodes are probably gone.
D-tackle.
Linval Joseph could be gone. I mean, there's a lot of things that could change. Everson Griffen doesn't necessarily need to be one of them. So I follow that up then with this question. Is it right for the Vikings to bring back Everson Griffen? Now, I just broke down all the personal elements, kind of the emotional feel to it. Obviously, I want to see him come back, and I'm sure you do too, and I'm sure our listeners do as well. But from a strictly objective standpoint, when you look at his on-field production, the player he is, the players you expect him to be next year, and the player you expect him to be probably in a couple of years, because if he signs a deal, it's probably going to be 2 or 3 years. Does it make sense, rationally speaking, for the Vikings to bring him back, considering their cap situation?
That's what I was going to get at, is it's not even just about his on-field performance, which I do think in 2019 he was far better than I expected. Obviously he didn't play a lot in 2018, was great in 2017, but played basically half the year with plantar fasciitis, which I know is extremely painful. And so coming, with those two things in mind, I didn't expect a ton from Everson in 2019, and he proved me wrong. And clearly he still has a lot still in the tank, if you will. But it's going to come down to the dollar amount more than does it make sense, black and white, yes or no. If he's able to come back at something like 7-8 mil for in 2020, where the Vikings are clearly trying to make sort of a one last shot at the Super Bowl with this window here, then I think you do it. If it's because that's dropping his cap by 5 mil. If you bring it down to 7.5 or something like that. So that would be something in that range I'm totally good with. But if he ends up coming back on something double digits, that's where you start to question it, because I think one thing we have to discuss here is Ifeadi Odenigbo and how he did look promising as kind of, he was – Everson Griffen was Ifeadi Odenigbo before Ifeadi Odenigbo, right? Griffen was that guy, the rotational guy that would come in, in pass rushing situations. Odenigbo did that this year and was pretty good at it. So there's that to think about too. The Vikings do have a guy that seems to be ready for a starting role, kind of waiting for Griffen to, whether he departs or not, but he's waiting for that starting role.
Absolutely. So let's look at this statistically from your basic stats here. The last 2 seasons, Everson Griffen has only played in 26 games. So he's missed 6 games. We know why. Okay. It's not necessarily something that we expect to continue in terms of longevity. This isn't like a situation where he tore his knee up or something like that. Right? And he is 32, by the way. I said 34 earlier. I was wrong about that. So he's also got 13.5 sacks over the last 2 years, over the last 26 games, versus the 13 that he had in 15 games in 2017, which could arguably be the peak of his entire career at 30 years old. You also look at the kind of the changes to how he's being used and kind of the deficiencies in his game. Obviously, he's still got great get-off. I know someone's giggling at that, but he's outstanding off the he's outstanding off the line of scrimmage, and he can still pass rush with the best of them. He's very strong. He's got
spin
great
move is
finesse.
still one of the best in football too.
Absolutely,
and the fake spin move.
Yeah, this fake spin move might actually be better than the actual spin move, if we're being honest here.
Right. It's funny how you've seen him set up the fake spin move before, but now it's like he's setting up the actual spin move by using the fake spin. It is pretty nuts actually watching. If you watch him every game, watch just him on a series of defensive plays. It's funny how much he actually goes to the fake spin move to start with, and then it goes back to the spin. You wonder how sometimes the spin works so cleanly. I think it's because he's setting that up versus the other way around.
And that's the type of thing that comes with experience, and that becomes a kind of a subjective element of why it makes sense to bring him back, because he does carry with him kind of the way to set up defensive linemen. I mean, Danielle Hunter, I'm going to get a little bit off topic here for about 15 seconds, but Danielle Hunter, when he came into the league, had absolutely no game in terms of finessing opponents. He was all build, all speed, and just trying to beat guys with just pure talent. I think that Everson Griffen and obviously Andre Patterson they were hugely involved in terms of turning him into the player he is today, in terms of hands usage, moving his legs effectively, using his body to kind of dip up and around defenders. All of those are things that you've seen from Everson Griffen that you now see from Danielle Hunter. And Danielle Hunter's just simply better at it. So Griffen is really important in terms of being able to help the guys around him, teaching them, but also he can still play a role on the field. Now, you said about $7.5 million. I think that's a solid evaluation for the level of starter he is. Now, as a rotational player, it becomes, okay, is he willing to be a rotational player? Think about Brian Robinson in the twilight of his career. He was able to take a step back to allow Danielle Hunter to bloom. Is Everson Griffen willing to do the same thing? I don't know the answer to that question, but that could also provide some more salary cap relief.
I also think Griffen's still at a higher level than Robinson was kind of at that point. Like it was,
right.
I think, when Robinson sort of took that step back, you had Hunter emerging as really a superstar, right? Because he had that 12.5 sack season to 2016.
He was playing better than Robinson was. Period.
Right. And I think it's sort of opposite now, where Griffen is still clearly, I think, superior to Odenigbo, while Odenigbo looks like going to be a solid starter, I think, in the NFL at some point here. Griffen is still clearly the superior player. So I don't know if a rotational thing will happen, but I do think if Griffen would he would concede to that if it became apparent that Odenigbo was suddenly the better player. I think he would acknowledge that, and I think that's you talked about the veteran leadership and everything, and kind of being a team guy. I think that's where that comes from. So I think he's still in that position. I do think in that way it compares to Robinson, that he would be willing to do that.
Absolutely. So we've kind of established where he stands at his career. We set some general parameters for what the salary cap, how that situation works and how he reflects on that. What do you think, if you are Rob Brzezinski, and granted, no one is Rob Brzezinski, so I'm not expecting you to be a big numbers guy all of a sudden, what would your contract offer look like for Everson Griffen?
I would probably do something like 3 years, like 16, 17, and then kind of go. I mean, I should say that because you're kind of at this point with 2020 being sort of your all in, like this is kind of what it appears to be sort of the last chance at a Super Bowl. You kind of want to maybe decrease the cap in 2020 so you can get as much out of that as you can, and then to get Everson to stick around, you probably want to kind of backload it a little bit, is my thought. But I am far from Rob Brzezinski here, so I'd go something 3 years, probably anywhere from 15 to 20, with kind of those last couple of years getting towards $10 million in salary cap hit versus maybe something cheaper in 2020.
Yeah, so I was looking at probably 2 years, something like $14 million with a team option for the third year.
Yeah.
The way that the first 2 years would look in my mind would be you pay him about $4 million this year, all guaranteed, 100% guaranteed, and then he'll have a $10 million hit next year. So that way you can kind of fix the cap situation immediately. You have problems next year possibly, but in this scenario, you'd be paying him guaranteed money. So you're saying to him, we're not going to cut you, which ultimately I think is a very important factor for him here, given the situation that you brought up with the Odenigbo, and you've also got some other pass rushers, and the Vikings are going to draft a defensive end in the third or fourth round anyways. So I think that the way that this kind of works in my brain is that you pay him the guarantee this year, and next year you set him up where it becomes difficult to cut him financially, but not impossible. So if he falls off a cliff this year in terms of on-field performance, you have a way to get out. But if he continues to play well, I mean, he very well. I mean, he keeps himself in great shape. There's no real character concerns at this point in his career. Granted, I'm not a doctor and I don't necessarily know where he's at mentally, but I have to believe that he's the type of guy that probably has 2 or 3 more years of at least productive football in him. Not necessarily starting caliber football, but productive. So I think that 2 years with a team option for a third is going to give the Vikings what they need in terms of getting out if they have to. We've talked about this a couple times this offseason. If they have to straight up hit the reset button after this year if it fails, let Kirk Cousins go, let Everson Griffen go, just scrap everything, let everyone go that's not named like Eric Kendricks and Danielle Hunter, basically. Um, that's kind of where I'm at, because I think that it allows you to hit the reset button if you need to, but if he's still good, you have him at kind of a deal.
Right. Yeah, and we don't know what Everson's willing to take either. This is pure speculation. Like, I mean, he might be doing this from his perspective. His motive here might be, I'm trying to get as much money as possible the last couple years of my career and then be done. Like, he might not, this whole trying to stick with the Vikings thing, like whatever the case, like that might not be what he's thinking, and I would respect that. Like, go get the money that you deserve. You know, that's always been my side of things. I just think he'd be one of those players that might be more likely to stick with Minnesota or stick with his longtime franchise than other players maybe. But this is all speculation. I think bottom line is Griffen at this point, I think he's still a stud. He's still one of the premier pass rushers in the NFL, and those are very valuable. And I think to have the duo of Griffen and Hunter is very scary for opposing quarterbacks. And I think that that duo hid the weakness at defensive tackle quite a bit in 2019. So bringing him back would be great, and if they're able to restructure, if Brzezinski's able to do his wizardry and figure something out and save cap, that would be awesome.
Absolutely. Last thing I'll say about Everson Griffen before we move on here to do some combine stuff. The emotional value of this situation. I personally, as I have gotten older, I've become more and more detached to players, right? I have become more interested in just the success of the organization as opposed to needing a certain player to be on the team for me to be happy. Like, do you remember? I remember, decade ago or whatever, when Adrian Peterson had his whole deal go down. That was kind of what started that for me, where I was like, I don't need Adrian Peterson to be here. I don't think he makes his team better anymore. And the kind of the history and the joy that Peterson brought early in his career no longer mattered to me. Still have his best interest in mind, still hope for the best, hope the guy gets his money, but I don't necessarily want the Vikings to give him this money. With Everson Griffen, this situation's kind of revisiting itself, where I would love to see him forever be in purple, because that's just like, dude, that's a milestone in itself to say that you played over a decade with one organization. So many things have to go right for that to happen, and I would love to see it, and I think it would be great. But I just want to point out that if he does decide to leave Minnesota, I'm kind of echoing your sentiment here. If he decides to leave Minnesota to take more money to go play in Oakland or something like that and get paid $25 million over the next 3 years because he provides the veteran leadership that an organization like Oakland desperately needs.
Las Vegas, you're right. Sorry. That's gonna be like the new St. Louis to LA for me. I'm gonna do it wrong for the entire next season. That would be okay with me, is what I'm trying to say. And I hope that it would be okay with you, the listener, as well, because he's given so much to this organization. And granted, the organization has given a lot to him as well. But he's such a big piece, and I know it might hurt, but if you want him to live a long, fulfilling, happy life, getting his money now will give him the opportunity to do so, and for his family as well. So, or hey, maybe he wants the Super Bowl, and maybe he's realized Minnesota might not be the spot for that too. That's also a possibility.
That's another interesting scenario. Yeah, for sure. So it'll be fun to see how this all plays out. Well, maybe it might not be necessarily fun, but it'll be something. It'll play out eventually, and we'll get an answer here in the coming future. Until then, though, let's talk a little bit about the Combine. So like I said at the top here, the NFL Combine is officially underway, and that doesn't necessarily mean that we have gotten any fun results yet, but we have gotten some measurements, which is one of the more fun things that at least for sure from a Twitter perspective, because it's so overanalyzed, it's so ridiculous, and a lot of the time, like, these measurements, they matter to a degree, right? Like, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that a guy who's tiny can just all of a sudden be a great defensive end. You need to hit a certain bar. But some of these, like, kind of some of these news stories that come out about tiny hands, which Joe Burrow is going through apparently now, and we remember with Teddy Bridgewater, they're a little bit ridiculous. It certainly seems like Joe Burrow has big enough hands to hold a football, and You could say the same thing about Teddy
You
Bridgewater
want to
as
ask
well.
every SEC opponent that he played last year if his hand size matters? Like, probably not.
You want to ask every single opponent that he played? I mean,
right. I mean, that's the point. And I think, I don't know, every single year at this time is that, I think it's Gil Brandt. He's the older, right? He had that 2 tweets in a row where back in 2014 where he, critiqued Teddy Bridgewater's hand size like at 9 1/4. It's like, oh, Teddy Bridgewater's hands 9 1/4 inches, much smaller than many of us thought could be concerning. And then the very next tweet is Jimmy Garoppolo, hand size 9 1/4 inches, meets the threshold, should be fine. Like, it's the exact same hand size, and just critiquing Teddy, saying he's concerned, and then Jimmy G saying, oh, he's fine, he's good enough. That's it's just. I don't know how much it matters. I really don't. I'm not gonna sit here and act like. I mean, Johnny Manziel, I remember, had huge hands, and how he turned out. So
right, his hands could unfortunately not control his ability to learn a playbook and execute that playbook. So, anyways, let's go through some of these numbers, anyways, because it is kind of fun, and there is some relevancy here. I know we just spent about 3 minutes making fun of this element of the combine, but there are some factors here that are more important than others, and you like to. Let's just be real here. There's not that many quarterbacks that are under 6 feet that are actually successful in the NFL. And I know someone's screaming Drew Brees and Russell Wilson at me right now. Shut up. Those are 2 examples of the last 50 years. Okay, so generally speaking, you want your quarterback to look like, a point guard basically. You want him to be at least 6'3". You want him to be able to see over the tackles. You want to make sure that he's able to kind of conduct an offense with the right frame, right? So quarterback is probably the only position today that, wide receiver and tight end, I don't think the Vikings have too much of an issue there. I think most of you guys would agree with me. It's still fun to look at some of these names, and I will spend a little bit of time on there. But the quarterback position, the reason why this is relevant is twofold. One, a lot of you guys hate Kirk Cousins, so you're looking for any way to get out of Kirk Cousins. That's why it's relevant for us. In terms of why it's relevant for the Vikings, Jake Fromm has came up in reports. There has been thoughts that he might go to
Sean Mannion is the Vikings' backup quarterback.
That's a very important point. I never want to see that happen again. And I'm tired of these clipboard holders being on the field for the Vikings. So that's why it's threefold, really. That one's for me mostly. So let's look at a couple of these quarterbacks here that might be somewhat relevant to the Vikings. We'll start with Jacob Eason here. Jacob Eason is an absolute enigma. There's a lot of people that think he's, a player that could be drafted in the first round, and there's a lot of people who think that he is a mid-round pick who's going to flame out and be terrible in the league. He had a hell of a day getting his body measured today. I know how ridiculous that sounds, but that's what happened.
I was going to say phrasing there, pal.
That's real. He measured in at 6'5" 7/8", 231 pounds, the hand size of 9 4/8, which we can reduce that one down to a half. I don't know why that says 4/8. That's ridiculous. Arm length of 32 7/8, and a wingspan overall of 79 inches. So, big quarterback, big frame, fits all of the Gil Brandt format. Like what he wants in a quarterback. Jacob Eason looks like it. Granted, he's not necessarily the most consistent thrower of the football, which seems to be a little bit relevant when you're playing football.
Yeah.
But he fits all those measurables, and he looks great on paper.
Like this measurement thing, it doesn't do it for me. Because remember how people loved, like Josh Allen killed it in this same thing.
Right.
Mitch Trubisky killed it in this same thing. These are, Blake Bortles killed it in this same thing. Like, these are quarterbacks that I'm actually just listing off quarterbacks that have made the playoffs with really good defenses while playing the quarterback position in terrible, ugly fashion. But point being, like, I have a roommate that's 6'4", 200, like, athletic dude. Not a good quarterback. Like, it's not like there's more to it. There's way more to it. Like, Kyler Murray's 5'7" or whatever the heck he is, and he's better than Josh Allen. So it's to me, like, this is the part of the combine, especially, that I don't pay attention to.
Yeah.
And even though I haven't really paid attention to the combine in a couple years now, like actually paid attention to it, but I especially don't pay attention to this part because now I do think for like especially for quarterbacks like this stuff I don't think it matters much, but you could get into like offensive line and like for the Vikings like cornerback, I think matters because Zimmer has preached so much about having a large defensive backs, large cornerbacks on his team, stuff like that. But in terms of quarterback, in terms of and even receivers to some degree, I don't think it matters a ton because we see how Stephon Diggs, best contested catch receiver in football, he's barely 6 feet tall. Like in a lot of cases, people over dramatize how much size and the measurables like this matter.
A couple other names here from this list that may or may not be relevant to the Vikings scouting department. Justin Herbert from Oregon had a nice day getting measured. 6'6" and 2/8, 236, 10-inch hands. Those are huge. 32 and 7/8 arms, and then 78 and 77/8 wingspan in terms of inches. He's probably a top 15 prospect. May not be in the Vikings' range. A couple other names that the Vikings, or at least their fans, have talked about with the potential of being in Minnesota. You got Jalen Hurts, who kind of an up and down in terms of, I'm basing my theories here off of the fundamental metrics, the Gilbrandts, if you will. 6'1", 222, 9 6/8 in terms of his hand size, 31 6/8 for arms, and 77 5/8 for wingspan. We've also got Jordan Love, who was another big winner here. This is the type, it's ridiculous, but these measurements are the type of things that can jump a guy from the third round to like the late first round for quarterbacks. And it's ridiculous, but we've seen it happen so many times that it is relevant. Jordan Love, 6'3", 6/8, 224, huge hands at 10.5, 32 and 5/8 for arms, and then a wingspan of 80 inches, which is ridiculous. So he's a big, big human. And then you've also got Jake Fromm here, which I think is the most important one just because he has been already connected to the Vikings. And he makes sense for the Vikings because as a second-round pick, he kind of looks like Kirk Cousins, and he kind of reminds me of Kirk Cousins, which is a little bit bothersome if you're going from Kirk Cousins to probably a worse version of Kirk Cousins. But he had a rough day having getting his height and weight assessed here. 6'1" and 7/8. That's subpar. 219. I mean, whatever. And then he's got the tiny hands. He's also going to get tiny hands here. 8 and 7/8, 31 and 1/8 arm, and then 75-inch wingspan. So those are the quarterbacks on this list here that I think are somewhat relevant to the Vikings. There are other guys on here that may or may not be a factor late in the draft, but those are the ones that if you're looking in the second round, they may or may not become, they may be on the Vikings' radar, I suppose. So I think that Drew has made his position here pretty clear that doesn't really care, and I honestly don't either. But those are the numbers for those of you who are interested in that. Now I want to take a quick look at the wide receivers and the tight ends here before we jump into our final segment. I'll just point out a couple names, and just to kind of go off of what you said before about how wide receiver measurables aren't all that important. Jerry Jeudy, big loser today, honestly, which is interesting. Stands at 6'1", 193. Okay, imagine that getting hit over the middle. I'm getting Anquan Bolden vibes, but not big enough to be Anquan Bolden. He's got 9.5-inch hands, 32 and 1/8 arms, and 76-inch wingspan. So Jerry Jeudy, the top wide receiver prospect in the draft, and it's based almost exclusively on his ability to run routes and catch the football in traffic, a la Stephon Diggs, like you just said. He may or may not drop because of these ridiculous things. So it might be something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I mean, I just looked up Stephon Diggs' height and weight. 6 feet, 191 pounds.
He's 6 feet in cleats. He's I mean, I've
Which,
stood
yeah,
stood next
right.
to him. I tower over Stephon Diggs. He's a small person, and you look at in terms of height.
You're calling a person that's listing at 6 feet like a tiny person. It's just, I mean, you are taller than him and a bigger person. That's for sure. That's clear, but it's just funny that's like an average male in the world is like 5'6".
Is that true?
It's 5'7" or 5'6". Yeah, it's like it's just because so many people around the world are actually like American males are much larger than other males.
Okay,
but this is off topic now.
I didn't know anything. I didn't know that, and that's interesting. So. Other wide receivers here that may become relevant to the Vikings now. Obviously, I don't think Jerry Jeudy's even on If Jerry Jeudy lasts past like pick 12, something happened. He got caught smoking weed or something like that. Names on here that interested me, and this is one that you brought up, I believe, last week. Donovan Peoples-Jones, 6'1", 5'8", 212, huge hands at 10 and 1/8 inches, arm length of 33 and 4.5, and then a wingspan of 79 and 2.25. So he's a very big person. It's probably a guy to keep an eye on in the mid rounds. I'm becoming more and more interested in him based on the measurables, and then also I'm interested in seeing how he performs at the actual combine, because his tape doesn't necessarily jump off the screen, and his statistics don't necessarily either. But he's the type of guy that you could necessarily mold. That you could potentially mold. So I would keep an eye on him. The other one that's kind of jumped, in terms of draft nicks, right? Guys that people have fallen in love with. Brandon Ayuk. Everyone's become a big fan of him. He's under 6 feet as well, but he's over 200 pounds, 9 6/8 for hands, 33 and 4/8 for arms, and 80-inch wingspan. So with the exception to his height, he actually did pretty well here with his measurables. And then Justin Jefferson from LSU is really the last name on here that I'm looking at that might be in kind of the Vikings range if you are thinking second or third round for a wide receiver. I don't know how long he's going to last. He's an interesting player. Given his performance at LSU, but he was playing with Joe Burrow, a lot of great players. He's a tough evaluation in my opinion. 6'1", 2/8, 202, 9 and 1/8 for hands, 33-inch arms, and 78-inch wingspan. Which, as a whole, he's 6'1", 200 is pretty solid for a receiver. He's going to have to gain some weight, but his hands and his arms and his wingspan are not necessarily great. So those are the names for wide receivers that I'm interested in. And I'm going to bring up two names here at tight end just because the Vikings have kind of built a fascination with tight ends and drafting tight ends when we don't really expect them to.
Yeah, that's true.
Going all the way back to Michael Pruitt, when that one kind of came out of nowhere in the 5th round in, 2015? Thaddeus Moss is the first one, and I bring that name up for the obvious reason here. Randy Moss's kid. Big important factor for LSU's championship in the kind of stretch run there. He's a big person, but he's not a tall person. 6'1", 7/8, 250, 9 and 7/8 inch hands.
He's only 6'1", 6'2".
Yeah, he does not look it, and I think it's because he can jump out of the gym.
He looks way taller.
Yeah, I would definitely keep an eye on his combine, like his actual testing results, because I think he definitely plays bigger than he is. But yeah, 31 and 7/8 for arms and 78 and 2/8 for wingspan. The other one here that has become he's an enigma, and everyone is falling in love with him based off of his physical stature and the projections that he's supposed to get at the combine, and that's Cole Kmet. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. I've never heard anyone say it before. I've just read it a bunch of times. He is truly a massive person and incredibly athletic, moves very, very well for his size. 6'5" and 6/8, 262. This guy just can stand in front of you and he can block better than Matt Khalil. 10 and a half inch hands, 33-inch arms, and then a 79-inch wingspan. So those are two tight ends that, based on their measurables, and then with Moss especially based on his legacy, keep an eye on them. I have already seen outlets comparing Kmet to Rob Gronkowski. So
that seems still premature, but that
a
happens
little
all the
bit,
time.
yeah.
So
right.
Who's the next Patrick Mahomes in this draft? Who's the guy? Well, there's probably not any of them.
Probably no one for the next 20 years, if that. Yeah. So that rounds out our combine measurables discussion.
That was some great radio. That was great.
I know, right? It's just not like it's something where like you have to do it because it's the time of year, and there are people that are interested in this stuff. But at the same time, like, who really cares? I didn't need to know that Thaddeus Moss was 3 inches shorter than I thought he was. He still plays tall, plays big, moves well.
Like, how much different is the general size of players at the SEC level versus NFL? Like, how much different can it be? Like, the competition he went against in college versus the competition he's going to go against the NFL. I don't know if it's that different.
Especially with his
from pure size. Pure size. I feel like it's not that different.
It's not, and the biggest difference that you see from a college player to an NFL player is just the amount of mass that they gain, muscle mass especially, over the course of the first 2 or 3 years in the NFL. And
Mm-hmm.
Thaddeus Moss is already a monster person in terms of muscle mass and weight. So, I don't know. I think some of this is silly, but it's somewhat entertaining. And for those of you out there who swear by it, those are your key players to keep an eye on for the first round of measurements here. And next week we'll get into the fun stuff after the actual combine happens, and that discussion hopefully will be a little bit more entertaining. So now for our final segment here, and I don't know how long this one will last because because of the changes the feature person for this segment has made, as of late at least. But we wanted to start what I am calling, and it's a very apt title. It's not creative at all. I'm just going to call this the Diggs Tweet Translator. So, for those of you out there who enjoy following Stefon Diggs' social media, I'm one of them. He's very interesting on social media. He is a character, to say the least. And for those of you who do not know what Twitter is or care, he tweets out kind of subliminal messages, basically. Just these very kind of cryptic tweets that people freak out about. And sometimes they're freaking out because they're just dumb and they don't know what they're talking about. Sometimes they're freaking out because they're a fan of a different team and they think it's appealing and there's a potential for them to land a very interesting and dynamic player on their team. And sometimes people just freak out for God knows why. So I want to make this a little bit more fun, and that's what the goal is here. So I picked out 5 tweets from Stefon Diggs since early February. And Drew and I are going to do our best to, keeping in mind, of course, that neither of us have spoken to Stefon Diggs recently. We do not know him on a personal level.
No.
We do not know how he operates socially. I know very little about the person, especially in 2020. Okay? We're going to try to diagnose these tweets and come out with an answer that is rational and what they actually mean, and not focus specifically on what they could mean. So the first one here, kicking us off, this one comes from February 9th. He said, "People don't appreciate things until they're gone. ... How would you translate that tweet?
He got a Little Caesars pizza and ate it, and then he's sad that it's gone because he ate all of it. That's how it would be relevant in my life. But no, actually, I'm sure it's something like I don't know. If I were to actually try and accurately translate it, it'd be like, he.
Let's think about. Let's do this. Let's think about all the ways that it could be relevant. He could have just broken up with a girl.
Yeah.
I've heard from a lot of people that Stefon Diggs is a bit of a ladies' man, and that he doesn't date during the season, which I think is hilarious. So maybe he broke up with a girl.
That's the first thing I go to, but I'm not about to speculate on.
We're having fun. We're having fun with this. This is not news. This is not reporting. This is us looking at tweets and trying to have fun with it.
Yeah. But yeah. I mean, it could be something as simple as just knowing him, knowing that I think it's pretty clear at this point he's just doing this to rattle people, and it's working.
Yeah, especially with the Patrick meme for his Instagram picture.
Literally, his profile picture on social media is a meme suggesting that he's trying to rattle people. That's how you translate the Patrick meme. So he's probably just got a list of these tweets in his phone. All right, I'm gonna put this one right now. This one go up at 9:00 tomorrow morning. So
I think that he's the type of guy that looks up inspirational quotes too and picks out a good one and tries to inspire. Yeah. He's that type of guy, I think.
Yeah.
The one thing I will say about this tweet specifically, that this could be deeply personal, and this applies directly to Stefon Diggs and things that I know about him. He did suffer family loss early in his life. So that type of thing. People don't appreciate things until they're gone. It could have just been him thinking about his dad. Could have been That's simple, Vikings fans. It could have been that simple. Okay? So, again, this is supposed to be a funny segment, so let's move on to something
you know what?
else.
Maybe he knew about Everson opting out. Give a little hint.
Hey, there you go. Exactly. Connect some. Yeah, there you go. Maybe it was a subliminal message directed at Everson Griffen. Maybe. Who knows? All right. Next one here. This one's from February 12th. Everything that was done in the dark is about to come to light. ... What do you make of that tweet, Drew?
think he's just thinking about the Super Bowl in 2012. He's rewatching it when the Niners and the Ravens played in, I think, the Superdome in Louisiana when the lights went out. I think he was just at that point in the game where the lights went out, and he's like, they're about to play this game in the light.
It seems fair. The date is somewhat relevant as well.
Sure.
I'm curious what goes on in this guy's mind. So when I see this, I think about the way he's projected himself in the past. He's a 5th-round pick. He used his Twitter bio many changes ago used to just be 5th-round pick ...
You would know that.
I would know that because I'm a huge fan of Stefon Diggs, and I'm a fan of his Twitter too. He doesn't necessarily do it for me all the time with the inspirational stuff because I'm not really like that. But some of the stuff is entertaining, and I definitely love the response from fans. I think that's very funny. But so for this one, for me, I think that this is just a consistent, he's very competitive. We can all agree on that. We know that about Stefon Diggs, extremely passionate, and he cares about where he was drafted versus where he thinks he should have been drafted. And looking back now in hindsight, he probably gets drafted 1st or 2nd in that wide receiver class among that group. Mari Cooper being really the one that's kind of makes it a little bit interesting. I think that this is just a continuation of that, where he's just saying the things that you thought about me when I was at Maryland, when I was getting hurt, and I was a gadget player, it's coming to light now that I'm a hell of a wide receiver in the NFL. I think that that's just kind of looking back at that. I think it's really as simple as that for this guy.
I don't think it's even that. I think it's I don't think it's football related. I don't think any of these are football related, but
I bet you a lot of them aren't. But anyways, moving forward here, number 3. This one is a retweet. A little bit more fun here. Retweet from Mike Evans of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He tweeted, "Y'all know it's all right to mind your own damn business sometimes." This came on February 14th, and Stefon Diggs retweeted that. Translate it for me.
He probably had a lot of, this is more speculating, the womanizer potential role that he's playing. Hey, it's Valentine's Day. Let me just do. Let me just do what I want to do. All right, I'm gonna just figure this out on my own. Everybody, I'm gonna do what I want on this day, on Valentine's Day. All right, that's all this is about.
I think so. I saw this, and I think you nailed it because of the date. I didn't think about the date, and I should have thought about it. I think that this one was just like a shut up to everyone. Like the media, the fans.
No, it's not it.
I think it was, dude.
He wants nothing more than people to be talking about him. That's what he wants right now. That's why he's doing all of this on Twitter. He wants people to be talking about him. I think the thing Nick Olson tweeted a little bit ago was his theory that he tweets all this stuff and suggests different things and doesn't shut down trade rumors during the season because he wants people to be talking about him, wants people to be, as Nick Olson said in the tweet, gawking at his route running and his skills on the field. Like, he wants that. And I think he's not trying to shut it up. If anything, he's trying to.
When I say shut up, I don't mean shut up about me. I mean shut up like you're being stupid. Mind your own business in terms of the business element of the football game.
That's probably true.
He read my theory, my basis for thinking here is maybe someone saw his contract number and was like, "This is what I think about how much money Stefon Diggs makes."
I mean, there's probably so many people tweeting, tagging him in tweets.
That's what I'm saying, and we know now
Stefon Diggs is making 14-something mil next year
to be a cancer, right? Someone probably tweeted something like that, and we know now, based off of Pardon My Take, who has done a great job doing this, by the way, that players do search their name on Twitter, and of course we know this from our own engagements with players who have searched.
Yes,
so
guilty.
Right. I bet Stefon Diggs searches his name. I mean, if you haven't Googled yourself or searched your name before, it could be entertaining if you have an online presence.
I know it's true for you, but for both of us, I know you if you Google yourself and then you see your one of your tweets or something in a popular media outlets article. Oh, what? Tampa Bay Times or something.
Yeah.
But one of my. It's weird.
It's interesting and it's fun. I mean. That's kind of what this is all about for us small people around here. When once in a while something goes big, that's interesting. That's fun. Number 4 here. This one comes from February 19th, so getting a little bit closer to present day now. You got to know the difference between constructive criticism and destructive criticism. ... What do you take on that?
5 dots.
5 dots on this one.
5 dots. So he took
not an ellipse. Almost a double ellipse. Close to it.
He took the time to make sure that there was 5 dots in this one, right?
I mean, he used 3 in the last couple tweets. So
he clearly is, serious about this one, because most of them have actual ellipses, 3 dots. This one's got 5 dots. This one probably goes out to, did the Vikings recently have a change at wide receiver coach?
They did.
Interesting. He got 5 dots on this one. A little more serious than the last one.
So are you suggesting that this one is a kind of a prelude to how to coach him? Or are you saying that maybe he already... Perhaps
either one. Or it could be not that at all. I'm totally guessing.
That's a really good point. It could also be not that at all.
All of these that we're suggesting could be completely inaccurate.
Yeah. They could be very wrong. We could be extremely off base in our thinking, for sure.
Yes.
When I look at this one, what's interesting about this one is that this could directly apply, because of who he is as a character and what I know about his person, this could directly apply to a number of different scenarios. This could be a football thing, but this could also be like a personal thing as well. Maybe he's just simply saying there's certain people in his life where they were important at one point, but their criticism went from being constructive to destructive, and he recognized that and he moved on, and now he feels better in his life. It could be that simple.
Could be about himself kind of teaching his brother how to adjust to the
there you go. And there's a couple of them too. Obviously, Trayvon is the one that's the big prospect right now, but we know that they follow each other hard on social media as well, and they interact. Could be a subliminal message directly at him. It's a good point. I like that one. That was good. All right, the last one here, and we'll wrap up the show. This one also came from February 19th. And the reason why I said that I'm not sure if this segment's going to last a whole lot is because I didn't find any. It's February 24th as of this recording. There wasn't any real fun, kind of crazy tweets. Like maybe someone said something to him, because he deleted a bunch of stuff and some of it's gone and whatever. Honestly, this segment would have been fun, more fun probably 6 weeks ago. But regardless, this is the last one here for today. Again, February 19th. These days you have to take things with a grain of salt. ... Loves the ellipses. Big fan.
So he's probably, gone through the line at McDonald's drive-through, and he's thinking, wait.
You're taking this very literally.
He's thinking, wait. These fries are a little too salty. I only need I need less salt on this. A grain of salt. That's what he's thinking. He's just thinking of a popular phrase to illustrate his frustration.
You think he would have said no pun intended though?
No, because he likes having this weird, questionable aura about what he means, and I think a pun intended would
shed too much
light. Would tell people that this not only is this joke kind of a joke, or this tweet kind of like a joke, but it would also suggest that many of his other tweets are. So I think the fact that he is kind of keeping it in the dark, with that a pun intended being relating to his last tweet one of the last tweets we discussed. But grain of salt, talking about food, talking about that he doesn't like salt on his food. I think if we were to ask him in training camp sometime if he likes salty food, he would be like, nah, not really.
Interesting. So I think that this one actually is one of the few times where he's actually interacting with fans, where he's seriously talking, like he's speaking to us as a group. And I think that I think that he's saying, this phrase, take it with a grain of salt, meaning it's not necessarily true. Everything could be. It could be a rumor. It could be real. It could not be. But you take it with a grain of salt, effectively saying, I don't know if you should be taking some of this stuff so seriously. I honestly believe that this is one of those few Diggs tweets where he actually is saying, giving some response to the fans. Because as a professional human being, it doesn't make that much sense to me to talk down about your employer. It makes more sense for you to talk up the kind of the situation that you're in. And granted, Diggs has not always done that, obviously, but I do think this is one of those situations where he's kind of he's saying okay, some of the things that you're hearing in the media right now, you don't need to buy it. It's just not true. It's just hot air. That's where I'm thinking on this one.
I see. I just don't buy that he's.
You don't buy that
any of
he's
his
ever
tweets.
tweeting about football? Ever?
No, I don't buy it at all. I don't think any of this stuff means anything to his NFL career. He's just tweeting stuff to tweet stuff.
It's entirely possible, and that's the fun of this segment here. So, let us know what you thought about the Diggs tweet translator. I thought it was kind of fun. I mean, it was all right.
Do it a couple times, like every couple shows or something.
It could be fun. Let us know what you thought of it. You know, if you enjoyed us kind of having some fun here.
This was pretty much nonsense for about 15 minutes.
Exactly. If you're into that, let us know, and we will continue this segment. If you're not, then we'll get rid of it. That's how segments work on the show. I think we've already gotten rid of like 2 segments. So, anyways, that is the end of the show. And that's everything that's essentially happened in Vikings land over the last couple of weeks here. I mean, it was very difficult to come up with.
Smooth wrap up of the show there. Well done.
All right, so the show is available on iTunes. It's available on Daily Norseman. If you want to watch us talk, we're on YouTube as well. Make sure to subscribe to those. We're a part of the Climbing the Pocket Network. Make sure to check out the shows that are also available there. The guys we work with do a tremendous job and seem to do a much better job analyzing the actual football elements and not just tweets than Drew or myself do. So if you like us, you'll probably like them. And if you don't like us, you'll probably like them too, because it kind of, I don't know. You know what I'm saying. I'm always bad at closing out shows. I don't know why you're bringing that up now. You got in my head a little bit there, I think. Anyways, thank you for listening as always. Like I said before, we'll focus more on the combine next week. We'll have some more interesting numbers to take a look at. We'll go through, review some players that are on the Vikings radar or should be on the Vikings radar, and kind of assess their draft status as it relates to their performance at the combine. That'll be the big topic next week, and then hopefully the Vikings will give us some more to work with, and we'll have some fun with that. So that's the game plan for next week. This show is over. Thank you as always for listening. Thank you for being part of this podcast with us, and we will catch you next week.